Whose beat-up junk heap is stinking up my parking lot?
Grant Blackwell held the microphone. 200 employees on the rooftop. Behind him, the screen showed a rusted 1972 Chevy Nova parked between Porsches.
Is that yours, Muley boy?
He pointed straight at Oscar Anderson. Janitor uniform, standing alone. Oscar didn't flinch.
She runs fine. Probably faster than half the cars out there.
The crowd went quiet. Grant's smile disappeared, then came back, nastier. Faster?
That ghetto trash can?
He stepped forward.
Fine. My Porsche, your junk. I win, car gets crushed, and you're gone. You win, 10% of my company.
He turned to the crowd.
Easy money, right?
Laughter. Every single person. Oscar looked at him, long and still.
Deal.
One word. The rooftop went silent. Nobody was laughing anymore, and nobody on that rooftop had any idea what they'd just witnessed. Whoa. But here's the thing. That beat-up car everybody laughed at, it's got a story that'll break your heart. Oscar drove south on Gratiot Avenue with both windows down. The Nova coughed at every red light. The exhaust rattled. The steering wheel shook above 40. From the outside, a scrapyard car, faded blue, rust eating through the wheel wells, a crack running the full length of the windshield. He turned onto his street in Southside. Small houses, chain-link fences, porches where old men played dominoes. His house sat in the middle of the block, white siding gone gray. He parked, killed the engine. His hand went to the ignition key. Brass. Worn smooth. 5 words scratched into the metal by his father's hand in 1986. Speed is nothing. Heart is everything. His father had given 2 keys, one to Oscar, one to Terrence. Oscar still had both. Inside, the house was clean, the way a man living alone keeps things clean. Nothing out of place, because nothing gets used. One framed photograph above the TV. 2 teenagers standing in front of a gleaming Chevy Nova. Chrome bumpers catching the sun. The older boy's arm around the younger one, both grinning so wide it hurt to look at. Summer of 2003. Terrence was 16, just helped rebuild the transmission for the 3rd time. Grease under his fingernails, pride all over his face. 6 years later, Terrence was dead. Oscar didn't look at the photograph. He walked past it the way you walk past a scar you've memorized. Sat at the kitchen table in the dark with the brass key in his hand. Somewhere in his chest, an echo. Terrence's laugh, high and loud. The growl of an engine at redline. Then nothing. Just the place where a laugh used to be. He sat there until the sun came up. The next morning, Grant bragged about the barbecue at an executive meeting. 8 executives. Italian coffee. You should have seen his face, standing there with his little paper plate like somebody invited him. Everyone laughed, except Patricia Cole, VP of Human Resources. Grant, you publicly threatened to terminate an employee and destroy his property. On camera. 3 videos are online. One has 40,000 views. Good. Free marketing. It's a lawsuit. Do you even know his name? Grant paused. He's the night janitor, Anderson something. Oscar. Oscar Anderson. 9 years, 0 complaints, 0 absences. Great, then he knows how to follow instructions. Meeting over. But in the back row, Colton Blackwell, 22, Grant's son, 6 weeks into his first job in marketing, had Oscar's employee file open on his laptop. Something about the barbecue video nagged him. Not the bet, not the laughter. Oscar's face when he said, deal. No anger, no fear. Like a man who already knew something nobody else did. That evening, a knock. Oscar opened the door to Nadine Brooks, holding a casserole dish and a face full of fury. Nadine was 60, retired school teacher, Terrence's godmother. The kind of woman who'd feed you with one hand and set you straight with the other. Heard about your little party last night. She pushed past him, set the casserole on the counter. Nadine, Some rich fool calls you boy in front of 200 people, and you shake his hand and say deal? It's nothing. It is not nothing, Oscar. Her voice cracked. You've been hiding for 15 years, walking around like a ghost, and not the kind people used to cheer for. She reached into her bag, pulled out a shoebox, old, taped at the corners, set it on the table. Inside, newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle, grainy photographs, a VHS tape, Ghost, Gratiot Avenue, 95. A photo of Oscar at 23, leaning against the Nova, the crowd blurred with celebration. A headline, Ghost wins Gratiot Championship, 10th straight year. Terrence kept every one of these, every clipping, every photo. Her voice softened. He was so proud of you. Oscar stared at the clippings, jaw tight. That was a different life. That was your life, and you buried it the day you buried your brother. She put her hand on his. Terrence is dead, baby, but you're not. Oscar pulled his hand away, gently, firmly. Terrence is dead because of driving, because I showed him that world, and it killed him. I appreciate the food, Nadine. You should go. She picked up her bag, left the shoebox on the table. The food's for Tuesday, too. Don't let it go bad. The screen door closed. Oscar stood alone with the clippings and the key warm in his pocket. He didn't open the shoebox again, but he didn't close it either. 3 miles away, Colton sat on his bed with a laptop. He typed, Detroit street racing legend, Ghost. One hit from the Detroit Free Press archive. Vivian Tate, 2010. The Phantom of Gratiot Avenue, Detroit's undefeated street racer, vanishes. A driver known only as Ghost dominated Detroit's underground scene from 1995 to 2009. No last name, no interviews. Just a Chevy Nova that showed up, destroyed everything, and disappeared. Undefeated. 10 consecutive championships. Then, nothing. After 2009, Ghost vanished. One photograph, grainy, a young black man standing beside a 1972 Chevy Nova. Colton stared at it, picked up his phone, opened the barbecue video, paused on Oscar holding his paper plate. Same jaw, same shoulders, same car. 25 years older. His hands were shaking. Dad, what did you do? Dawn. Oscar on his front porch, coffee going cold, the street empty. The Nova sat in the driveway. Dew on the windshield. A bird landed on the side mirror, tilted its head, flew off. Somewhere in that engine, beneath the rust, beneath 15 years of grief, 402 cubic inches of hand-built American muscle waited. And in a loft across town, a 22-year-old kid was about to pull on a thread that would unravel everything Grant Blackwell thought he knew about his family, his company, and the janitor who cleaned his floors. 3 days passed. The barbecue videos kept spreading. 40,000 views became 400,000. Half the internet calling Grant a bully. The other half calling Oscar a fool for accepting. Oscar kept mopping floors. Same shift, same silence. If the videos bothered him, nobody could tell. Thursday morning, his supervisor told him to report to the 32nd floor. Mr. Blackwell wanted to see him. Oscar had never been above the 3rd floor. 9 years in the building, and the highest he'd gone was the supply closet, where they kept the bleach. The elevator took 11 seconds. It felt longer than his whole shift. Grant's office occupied the entire northeast corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A desk that cost more than Oscar's house. 16 model cars on a shelf. Perfect replicas of every vehicle Grant owned. A framed Forbes cover on the wall. The man driving Detroit's luxury revival. Grant stood by the window. Casual. Calculated. Anderson, sit down. Oscar didn't sit. Look, the barbecue got out of hand. My lawyers drafted something. Sign a non-disclosure, take 20,000, we both move on. No race, no drama. He slid a manila folder across the desk. Oscar looked at the folder, looked at the model cars, looked at Forbes Grant on the wall. You don't even change your own oil, do you? Grant's smile cracked. Excuse me? 16 cars. 3.2 million in your garage. And I bet you've never laid under any of them with a wrench in your hand, never bled on an engine block, never rebuilt a transmission at 2 a.m. because you couldn't afford a mechanic. Oscar's voice was level, quiet. You don't know cars, Mr. Blackwell. You know prices. You're out of your depth, Anderson. Maybe. Oscar pulled a folded piece of paper from his breast pocket. Notebook paper, blue lines, pencil. He unfolded it and set it on the desk. I don't want your severance. I'll do your race, but I've got conditions. 5, non-negotiable. He read them, slowly, each one landing like a hammer. 1. You apologize publicly. Same rooftop, same employees, to their faces. 2. The race gets broadcast live on every Blackwell Motors channel. The whole world watches. 3. If I win, the 10% equity funds a community mechanic training center in Southside. He paused, something heavier underneath. Named the Terrence Anderson Center, after my brother. The room went quiet. Grant hadn't known Oscar had a brother. 4. Win or lose, every janitor, custodian, and night shift worker gets a 40% raise and full health benefits. 5. Before the race, you drive 1 lap in my car. Oscar looked up, straight into Grant's eyes. You should feel what it's like to sit where I sit. Silence. Grant stared. The smug grin was gone. Annoyance, confusion, and underneath, buried where he'd never admit it, doubt. You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking? Here was the thing Grant understood, even if he couldn't say it. He needed this race more than Oscar did. The videos were everywhere. The comments were brutal. If he backed down now, the story writes itself. CEO bullies working man, then runs. Oscar could walk away. Grant couldn't. His ego wouldn't let him. And Oscar knew it, had known it since the rooftop. Grant picked up a $600 pen that had never signed anything that mattered to anyone but him. He signed. Oscar took the paper, folded it, back in the breast pocket, next to the brass key. See you on Gratiot Avenue, Mr. Blackwell. He walked out, didn't shake hands, didn't look back. An employee in the hallway filmed Oscar walking out of the corner office. Gray uniform, stone face, posted to TikTok with 3 words. He said yes. 600,000 views within the hour. By nightfall, hashtag janitor versus CEO, hashtag Chevy Nova challenge, hashtag ghost returns. That last one caught fire fastest. People who hadn't thought about Detroit street racing in a decade suddenly remembered. Old forums resurfaced, grainy flip phone videos, stories from barbershops and body shops across the East Side. Ghost is back. In a newsroom downtown, Vivian Tate set her coffee down, watched the TikTok 3 times, zoomed in on the car from the barbecue video. Rusted, dented, faded blue. She'd seen that car before. In a photograph she'd taken herself in 2008 on Gratiot Avenue. She dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Darnell's Auto, we're closed. Darnell, it's Vivian Tate, the TikTok, the janitor with the Nova. Is that who I think it is? Darnell stood in his struggling shop, peeling paint, broken lifts. He watched the video. His hands were shaking. That's Ghost. Oscar pulled up to Darnell's Auto at 9 p.m. Friday. Hadn't been here in 15 years. The shop bell rang. Darnell stood at a workbench, back turned. Took you long enough. Darnell, 15 years, 15 years I called. Not once you picked up. He turned around, older, thinner, eyes harder, hurt. I lost him too. Terrence was my family too. I know. Do you? Because you disappeared. Didn't just leave racing. Left all of us. Oscar didn't defend himself. Darnell was right. I'm sorry. 2 words. 15 years late. Darnell stared at him, breathing heavy. Then his shoulders dropped. Not forgiveness, not yet. but the door cracking open. Pop the hood. They stood on opposite sides of the engine bay, the 402 big block V8 that the three of them built together. Dusty, dormant, intact. Darnell ran his hand along the valve cover. She needs new plugs, fresh lines, full flush. He looked up. But the heart's still good. Terrence built it to last. I can't do this alone. Darnell reached across the engine bay. Not a handshake, just his hand on Oscar's shoulder. You never could. That's why you had us. They started that night, wrenches turning, oil draining black. At midnight, they sat on the concrete floor eating Chinese takeout, backs against the Nova's front tire. Darnell told a story about the time Terrence accidentally put diesel in the tank before a race. Oscar laughed. A real one, rusty, surprising, from the gut. Darnell looked at him. There he is. Outside, the internet was already calling it the race of the decade. But Oscar wasn't thinking about the internet, or Grant Blackwell, or 10% of anything. He was thinking about the last time he sat on this floor with a third set of chopsticks, and the empty space where that third person used to be. The Nova's resurrection took 2 weeks. Oscar and Darnell worked every night after Oscar's shift. Clock out at 5 a.m., drive to Darnell's auto, turn wrenches until noon, sleep 4 hours, do it again. The hard part wasn't the work. Oscar's hands knew this engine the way a pianist knows a keyboard. The hard part was the silence. The moments when Darnell handed him a socket wrench and their fingers brushed and neither said anything. Because the last time 3 pairs of hands worked on this engine, 1 pair belonged to Terrence. But they kept going. Draining oil that came out black as ink, replacing cracked fuel lines, pulling spark plugs caked in carbon and seating new ones, gapped by hand to the exact clearance Terrence had spec'd in a notebook Darnell still kept in his top drawer. By the end of the first week, the neighborhood noticed. Curtis, from 3 blocks over, showed up with a 6-pack and a lawn chair. Reggie and Malcolm pulled up with a set of barely worn tires. Heard Ghost needed shoes. Old racing friends drifted through. Kids from the block gathered on the sidewalk. One of those kids was Jalen, 16, tall and skinny with hands too big for his body. Watched from the sidewalk for 3 days before stepping inside. Can I help? Oscar looked at the kid. Saw something familiar. The same hunger Terrence had at 16. You know what brake pads are? Jalen shook his head. Come here. Oscar knelt beside the front wheel. Showed him the caliper, the rotor, the wear pattern. Jalen watched with focus that can't be faked. Now you do the other side. Jalen dropped the socket twice, but he got the pad in. Oscar checked his work, nodded. Not bad. Jalen grinned like he'd won something. Oscar turned away before the kid could see what that grin did to him. Because the last person who'd grinned at him like that was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. That night, Oscar took Terrence's key off his pocket chain and hung it on a steel chain around his neck. Over his shirt. Visible. The key had lived hidden in his pocket for 15 years. Grief tucked away. Now, it was armor. Saturday. A black hoodie walked into the shop. Darnell blocked the bay door. You lost, rich boy? Colton Blackwell pulled his hood back, expensive sneakers trying hard to look cheap. I know who Ghost is. I found the article. Vivian Tate, 2010. He looked at Oscar. And I know what my father did was wrong. I want to help. Help. Darnell didn't move. Your daddy's Porsche is getting tuned by a Formula One crew, and you want to help us change spark plugs. Yes, sir. Oscar studied the kid, saw nervousness, saw real shame, the kind that lives in the gut, not the kind that performs. A 22-year-old who'd grown up in a house full of trophies he didn't earn, trying to stand in a shop full of people who'd earned everything. Grab a wrench. Colton held it wrong, tried to loosen a bolt and nearly stripped the head. Jalen, 1 week of experience, corrected his grip without saying a word. The ice broke. Not with a speech, with a stripped bolt and a teenager teaching a billionaire's son how to hold a wrench. Later, Colton asked the question Oscar knew was coming. The article mentioned a race in 1995. Ghost versus someone named Harlan. That was my grandfather. He paused. My grandfather started Blackwell Motors 6 months after that race. Those two things are connected, aren't they? Oscar went quiet. That's a story for another day. Colton nodded, but his eyes said, I'm going to find out. The next afternoon, Nadine brought the shoebox to the shop. She and Darnell spread the contents across the workbench. One clipping stopped everyone. Ghost wins Gratiot Avenue Championship for 10th straight year, 2008. The photo beneath it, Oscar on the left, Darnell on the right, and in the middle, Terrence, 21, alive, grinning wider than anyone. Darnell picked it up, eyes glassy. Look at this fool. Look at that smile. Oscar touched the edge of the photo, just rested his fingertip on Terrence's face. Nadine's hand on his back. He kept every one of these. He was so proud of you, Oscar. He'd be proud right now. Oscar took the key from his neck, held it, set it on the workbench next to the photograph. The key and the photo side by side. Then let's finish what he started. Across town, Grant was spending money like it could buy speed. Klaus Engel, retired Formula One pit crew chief, flown first class from Stuttgart. 2 engineers, custom exhaust, suspension mapping, launch control calibrated to the inch. His marketing team filmed everything, drone shots, slow motion revs. Title, The CEO Who Races. The comments told a different story. Where's the janitor's video? Hashtag janitor versus CEO. This dude spent $300,000 to beat a 50-year-old Chevy LMAO. Hashtag ghost returns. Patricia Cole sat across from him, scrolling mentions. The sentiment is 80-20 against you. 2 sponsors called, asking questions. By Sunday, no one will remember the janitor's name. Patricia closed her laptop. She'd learned years ago that arguing with Grant was like arguing with weather. The night before the race, Saturday, 11 p.m. Everyone had gone home. Nadine left a plate of fried chicken on the workbench with a note. Eat. N. Oscar sat alone in the Nova. The car was ready. Fresh lines, new plugs, the tires Reggie and Malcolm brought. The body still carried every scar, rust, dents, faded paint. Nobody had touched the exterior. That wasn't the point. Under the hood, 402 cubic inches of hand-built American muscle. An engine 3 brothers built together. An engine that had never lost. Oscar gripped the brass key in the ignition. I'm not doing this for the money, T. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it because you never got to finish your last race. You were 22. You had so much road left. His grip tightened. So I'm going to finish it for you. He turned the key. The 402 big block V8 exploded to life. The shop windows shook. Tools rattled on the pegboard. 3 blocks away, Nadine sat on her porch with a cup of tea. The night was quiet. Then she heard it. A sound she hadn't heard in 15 years. That engine. She set the tea down, closed her eyes, smiled. There you go, baby. There you go. But neither Oscar nor Grant knew that a journalist named Vivian Tate had spent the last 10 days pulling on a thread. And what she'd found was about to turn this race into something neither of them could control. Vivian Tate hadn't slept in 3 days. Her apartment looked like a crime scene. The kind where someone is trying to prove something nobody wants proven. Papers spread across every surface. Printouts pinned to the wall with red string connecting dates and names. 6 browser tabs open. Cold coffee with a skin on top. She'd started with the people who were there. Old street racers, retired mechanics, guys who used to run books on underground races in the late 90s. Most didn't want to talk. A few did. A man named Curtis, the same Curtis who'd shown up at Darnell's shop with a 6-pack, sat across from her at a diner on Michigan Avenue. 2 cars at the line, Curtis said. Ghost in the Nova, and some rich kid from Grosse Pointe in a modified Mustang. Twin turbo, custom everything. Spent a fortune. Thought money could beat skill. What was the rich kid's name? Curtis stirred his coffee. Blackwell. Harlan Blackwell. Vivian set down her pen. Honey, I timed that race myself. Harlan sat in that Mustang like he owned the street. And Ghost buried him. Wasn't even close. A black kid from Southside just embarrassed Grosse Pointe royalty in front of 500 people. Harlan sat in that car for 10 minutes after. Didn't get out. Something broke in him that night. Vivian went to the Detroit Public Library archives. Microfiche. Old newspapers. She found a small item in the Metro section. October 1995. Underground race draws hundreds to Gratiot Avenue. Police investigate. No names, no photos. But the date matched. Then she found the footage. A VHS tape, digitized by a local historian, sitting in an online archive nobody had touched in years. Shaky camera. Nighttime. Headlights cutting through exhaust smoke. 2 cars at a makeshift starting line. A 1972 Chevy Nova. Blue and chrome, gleaming under streetlights. A young black man behind the wheel. 23 years old. Calm as still water. The camera panned. A white Ford Mustang, modified, turbos whining. The driver? Blonde hair, square jaw, expensive watch catching the light. Harlan Blackwell. Unmistakable. The race lasted 11 seconds. The Nova pulled away like the Mustang was standing still. The crowd erupted. The camera shook with the noise. Vivian pulled up her timeline. Harlan founded Blackwell Motors in April 1996, 6 months after the race. She dug into the original investor pitch deck, scanned and uploaded to a financial database. Page 3. A section titled Founder's Vision. 1 sentence jumped off the screen. I have experienced firsthand the humiliation of losing to inferior machinery. Blackwell Motors exists to ensure that superiority in engineering, in design, in every measurable dimension is never again in question. Inferior machinery. A man who lost to a hand-built Chevy Nova driven by a black kid from Southside and called it inferior machinery. Then built a billion-dollar company on top of that wound. Blackwell Motors wasn't founded on innovation. It was founded on humiliation. And the man who caused that humiliation was currently mopping floors in the building Harlan built. The morning before the article dropped, Grant's lawyers made their move. A courier arrived at Darnell's auto at 8 a.m. Inside, a cease and desist on Blackwell Motors' letterhead. The Nova hadn't passed the Michigan State inspection. Not street legal for a sanctioned event. Darnell threw it on the workbench. He's trying to kill it on a technicality. Nova hasn't been registered in 3 years. No plates, no emissions cert. Can they do that? Jalen asked. Rich people don't fight with fists. They fight with paperwork. Oscar called Colton. Your father's trying to kill this before it starts. Silence on the line. Then, what did he do? Cease and desist, claiming the Nova isn't street legal. Oscar heard Colton exhale. The kind of breath you take before crossing a line you can't uncross. I'll handle it. That afternoon, Colton walked into Grant's office without knocking. Grant was on the phone with Klaus Engel, discussing tire pressure. The cease and desist. Pull it back. Not now, Colton. You made the bet. You signed the conditions, in front of 200 people, on camera. Colton's voice was steady, but his hands were fists at his sides. If you back out on a technicality, every single person on the internet will know you were afraid to race a janitor in a 50-year-old car. This is a business decision. This is fear. And everybody can see it. Father and son stared at each other. Something moved between them that had never moved before. Not rebellion, something quieter. Disappointment. Grant withdrew the cease and desist by end of day. But something had shifted. For the first time, The ground moved under his feet, and his own son was the one pushing. The article hit Thursday at 6 a.m. Front page of the Detroit Free Press, digital edition. The Ghost and the Empire. How a Street Racing Loss Built a Billion-Dollar Company. By Vivian Tate. 4,000 words. Meticulous. Devastating. The 1995 footage, now hosted on the Free Press website. The investor pitch quote. Interviews with 6 former street racers. A timeline showing the founding of Blackwell Motors exactly 6 months after Harlan's loss. And 2 photographs side by side. On the left, young Oscar Anderson, 1995, standing next to the Nova after the championship. On the right, present-day Oscar, janitor uniform, walking out of Grant Blackwell's office with a folded piece of paper in his pocket. Same man, same car, 30 years apart. By noon, 2 million reads. By evening, CNN, ESPN, the New York Times. Twitter didn't just trend, it detonated. Hashtag the ghost in the empire. Hashtag janitor versus CEO. Hashtag ghost returns. The story wasn't about a race anymore. It was a reckoning. A billion-dollar empire built on the rage of a man who couldn't handle losing to a black kid from the wrong side of town. A janitor mopping floors in a building that only existed because he'd won. Stock dropped 4% in a single session. Board of directors called an emergency meeting. 2 sponsors quietly suspended their partnerships. Grant sat in his office with the door locked, the article glowing on his screen. Read it 4 times, hands shaking. He picked up the phone and called the only person who would know the truth. 3 rings. A careful voice. The voice of someone who'd been waiting for this call for 30 years. Mom? Grant? The article in the Free Press. About Dad. About the 1995 race. He paused. Is it true? Eleanor Blackwell, 75, sat in her sunroom in Palm Beach with iced tea and a view of the ocean. The silence lasted long enough for Grant to hear the waves. Your father was a proud man, Grant. Too proud. Is it true? He raced a boy on Gratiot Avenue. A black boy. A nobody, he called him. Drove some old Chevrolet. She paused. Your father lost. Badly. In front of everyone. And he never recovered. Not really. Everything your father built, the dealerships, the brand, all of it, was to make sure he never felt that small again. Her voice cracked. It ate him alive, Grant. Every single day, until the day he died. Grant hung up, sat in the dark, staring at his father's portrait. Harlan Blackwell, founder, visionary, the man who built an empire from nothing. Except it wasn't from nothing. It was from a loss. A loss to the man who cleaned Grant's toilets. Man, are you kidding me? 9 years. 9 years this man mopped floors in a building that only exists because he won. And nobody knew. Not one person. Put yourself in those shoes for a second. Could you take that? Outside Darnell's shop, the satellite trucks arrived before breakfast. 6 news vans, 20 reporters, camera crews from 3 networks, a helicopter overhead. Oscar wiped his hands on a rag, touched the brass key at his chest, walked outside. Cameras swarmed, microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping. Oscar, did you know Harlan Blackwell started his company because he lost to you? Oscar stood still. Morning sun caught the brass key. I didn't race Harlan for his company. I raced him because I loved to race. What he did with his loss was his business. What I did with my win was mine. And what did you do with your win? Oscar looked at the reporter. A young woman with a notebook. Couldn't have been older than Terrence would be now. I raised my brother. The kind of pause that makes a room hold its breath. Until I couldn't anymore. Silence. Total.
Every camera held on his face. Not performing, not posing. Just a man telling the truth. Inside the shop, Nadine stood behind the window, both hands pressed to her mouth, tears running down her fingers.
That evening, loading dock behind the shop. Oscar sat on the concrete edge, legs hanging over. Jalen beside him. Root beer. Sunset over Southside. The reporters were gone. The cameras packed up. Tomorrow was the race. "Mr. Anderson, are you scared?" Oscar looked at the kid, 16, eyes full of something that hadn't been broken yet. "Every time I turn that key, son." He looked at the Nova in the lot below, last light catching faded blue paint. Every single time. They sat in the quiet, an old man and a young one, a ghost and a kid who'd never seen a race, watching the sun set on the day before everything changed. In 12 hours, 5,000 people would line Gratiot Avenue. 2.3 million would watch online. A Porsche worth $380,000 would face a Chevy Nova held together by rust and memory. But the real race, the one 30 years in the making, had nothing to do with cars.
Sunday morning, 7 a.m. Gratiot Avenue, barricaded, shut down. Police cruisers at every intersection for half a mile. They started arriving before sunrise. By race time, 5,000 people lined the street. Lawn chairs, coolers, hand-painted signs. One read, "Ghost never left." Another, $380,000 versus Heart. Heart wins. A little girl sat on her father's shoulders, holding a cardboard Chevy Nova colored in blue crayon. ESPN had a broadcast crew. CNN had a live feed. Drones overhead. The live stream counter hit 1 million before either car appeared. At 8:45, a flatbed delivered Grant's Porsche 911 GT3 RS. Midnight black. A 4-man pit crew in matching uniforms guided it into lane 1. 520 horsepower, launch control, traction management, $380,000 of German engineering. At 8:52, the crowd heard it before they saw it, a rumble. Deep, the kind that starts in the pavement and crawls into your chest. The Nova came down Gratiot under its own power. No flatbed. Oscar behind the wheel. Windows down. Faded blue paint. Rust. Cracked windshield. And on the driver's door, hand-painted in white, 2 letters. T.A. Terrence Anderson. The crowd saw them. The roar shook the barricades. Oscar pulled into lane 2, killed the engine. Grant stepped out of the Porsche. Racing suit, Blackwell Motors logo. He looked at 5,000 faces, most of them not on his side. For the first time in his life, his money didn't matter, and nobody was impressed. Condition 5. A race official announced it. Mr. Blackwell will complete 1 lap in the challenger's vehicle. Grant walked to the Nova. Oscar stepped out and held the door. Said nothing. Grant folded himself into the driver's seat. Too tall. Knees against the dash. Cracked leather. Analog gauges. No screen. Steering wheel wrapped in electrical tape. The brass key hanging from the ignition. He turned it. The V8 exploded to life. The sound hit him in the sternum. The whole car shook. No traction control. No stability assist. No computer telling him anything. Just engine, gearbox, road. He drove the lap slowly. The car fought him. Heavy clutch, no power steering, brakes that demanded real force. Sweat on his forehead before the first bend. The crowd watched in silence. A billionaire in a janitor's car. When Grant pulled back and got out, he paused. His hand rested on the Nova's door panel. Not a slap, not a pat. Just his palm on the metal. Gently. Oscar saw it. Said nothing. Darnell leaned to Nadine. He felt it. Both cars at the line. Lane 1. The Porsche. Climate controlled. Digital displays. Klaus Engel in Grant's earpiece. Launch control engaged. Full throttle on the light. Lane 2. The Nova. Windows down. No earpiece. No crew. Just Oscar, the brass key, and the smell of old leather and new oil. Oscar closed his eyes for 1 second. He wasn't on Gratiot Avenue. He was in Darnell's shop 20 years ago. Terrence leaning over the engine bay. Listen to her, O. She tells you when she's ready. Green light. Both engines erupted. The Porsche launched like a bullet. 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds. At 500 feet, 2 car lengths ahead. The crowd gasped. Behind, the Nova was slower off the line. No launch control. Rear tires spun before catching. Oscar didn't panic. He didn't chase. He listened. At 800 feet, the exhaust note changed. Deeper. The hand-built V8 found its sweet spot. The place Terrence engineered into the cam profile where the engine stopped working and started singing. Oscar shifted into third. The Nova surged. 1,000 feet, 1 car length. 1,200, half a length. Grant saw the Nova growing in his mirror. Pushed harder. RPMs redlining. Traction light blinking. 1,500 feet, side by side. 5,000 people on their feet. The sound was a wall. Oscar's hands were relaxed, eyes half closed. He wasn't racing Grant. He was racing alongside a ghost in the passenger seat, grinning, saying what he always said. Now, Ghost. Now. 4th gear. The Nova detonated. The rear squatted. The exhaust screamed. 402 cubic inches clawing asphalt. 1,800 feet. Nova ahead by half a length. Grant pushed everything, foot flat, every system maxed. Not enough. 2,000 feet. Oscar Anderson crossed the finish line 1 full car length ahead of a $380,000 Porsche. The sound wasn't a cheer. It was a detonation. 5,000 voices, air horns, strangers grabbing strangers, tears on faces that had no reason to cry except they'd just watched what they'd been waiting their whole lives to see. The live stream chat. 3 words on a loop. Ghost. 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 Oscar sat in the Nova, engine idling. Reached for the brass key, pressed it to his forehead. We did it, T. We finished the race. Grant sat in the Porsche a long time, engine off. The crowd chanting Ghost like a pulse. He took off his earpiece, got out, walked toward the Nova. 5,000 people held their breath. Oscar stepped out. They stood face to face. Grant opened his mouth, closed it. The arrogance was gone. The performance was gone. Just a man standing in the wreckage of everything he thought he was. I don't know how to say this. I've never had to. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. Not just for the barbecue, for all of it. For what my father did, for what I didn't know, and what I should have known a long time ago. Oscar studied him. Not with anger, not with triumph, with the careful attention of a man who knows the difference between words that perform and words that bleed. Apology's a start, but your employees are still waiting on those raises. Grant almost laughed. A real one. The kind that comes from surprise and the sudden absurd lightness of being held accountable by a man who has every reason to hate you and doesn't. Monday morning, they didn't shake hands. Not yet. Some things don't need a handshake. Some things just need a man to stand where he's standing and mean what he says. Vivian Tate stood 50 feet away. Live broadcast. 2.3 million watching. I've covered this city for 15 years. I've never seen anything like what just happened on this street. She looked over her shoulder at Oscar, still by the Nova, the brass key catching the sun. Oscar Anderson could have been famous. He chose to be invisible. He mopped floors in a building that existed because of him, and never said a word. He didn't race today for revenge. He raced because his little brother never got to finish his last ride. She steadied. Oscar Anderson didn't need Blackwell Motors. But Blackwell Motors, and maybe all of us, needed to remember Oscar Anderson. Behind her, the crowd still chanted. But Oscar wasn't listening. He was sitting in the Nova with the door closed and the engine off, holding a brass key that said, "Speed is nothing. Heart is everything." And for the first time in 15 years, he believed it. 1 week later, Grant Blackwell stood on the same rooftop terrace where he'd called Oscar Anderson boy. Same terrace, same employees, plus 100 more who came just to be there. No barbecue, no big screen, just a man and a microphone and the weight of what he'd done with it last time. He spoke for 4 minutes. No script. His PR team had drafted something polished. He'd thrown it away. 3 weeks ago, I stood right here and humiliated a man I didn't know. I didn't know his name. I didn't know the car I laughed at was the last thing his brother ever touched. I didn't know my father's company exists because of a race that man won 30 years ago. He paused. Some faces sympathetic, some still angry, most just watching. I used words I've been hiding behind my whole life. Words that let me feel bigger without earning it. That stops today. 40% raises for every custodial and maintenance employee. Full health benefits. Effective immediately. 10% equity, approximately $94 million, transferred to a nonprofit, the Terrence Anderson Foundation. Oscar Anderson, sole director. Grant looked at the back of the terrace. Oscar stood there. Same spot as 3 weeks ago, wearing his gray uniform. One last time, by choice. Their eyes met. Grant nodded. Oscar nodded back. That was enough. Oscar turned in his badge the next morning. 9 years of night shifts. He didn't leave because the job was beneath him. He left because Terrence needed him somewhere else. The building was an abandoned warehouse on Livernois Avenue. Broken windows, pigeons in the rafters. Oscar stood in the middle and saw what nobody else could. Mechanic bays, classrooms, a diagnostics lab, a drag strip simulator. Darnell looked around, kicked a piece of concrete. You see a community center. I see a building trying to kill us. I see both. We start tomorrow. 6 months of renovation. Oscar there every day. Darnell ran the mechanical build-out. Nadine organized the curriculum. Jalen showed up after school, sweeping, carrying lumber, learning blueprints. Colton handled the money, permits, insurance. Everything the Blackwell name was good at, turned towards something it had never been used for. The sign went up on a Tuesday. White letters on blue. The same blue as the Nova. The Terrence Anderson Community Auto Center. Ribbon cutting. Saturday in October. 300 people on folding chairs. Cool air. Gold light. Nadine in the front row. Darnell beside her in a clean shirt. First time anyone had seen him without grease in 30 years. Jalen in a Navy Center t-shirt. Colton in the back row, quietly. Oscar stepped to the podium. Black shirt. The brass key around his neck. The last time it would hang there. I spent 15 years trying to be invisible. I thought if nobody saw me, the pain couldn't find me either. But pain doesn't work that way. It finds you in the dark. It sits with you. It waits. His voice was steady, not practiced. The voice of a man saying out loud what he'd said to himself 1,000 times in the dark. My brother Terrence was the bravest person I ever knew. Not because he was fast, though Lord he was fast. Warm laughter. But because he believed a kid from Southside with a wrench and a dream could build something beautiful. He built this engine. He built this car. And in a lot of ways, he built me. Nadine's hand found Darnell's, both crying. I didn't race on Gratiot Avenue to prove anything to Grant Blackwell. I raced because Terrence never got to finish his last ride. He was 22. He had so much road left. And every kid who walks through these doors, every kid who picks up a wrench for the first time, that's Terrence. finishing what he started. He lifted the brass key. Sunlight caught the engraving. The center isn't mine. It's his. And it's yours. Because speed is nothing. Heart is everything. 300 people rose. Nadine sobbing. Darnell wiping his face. Jalen standing on his chair. Colton in the back, clapping until his palms were raw. The brass key went into a glass case at the center's entrance that afternoon. Black velvet, museum glass. Speed is nothing. Heart is everything. Engraved by James Anderson. Given to his sons, Oscar and Terrence, 1986. Oscar's idea, the part that made Nadine cry hardest, was the replica keys. Every graduate receives a brass key on a steel chain. Same size, same engraving. Their ignition key to whatever comes next. First graduating class, 12 students, Jalen among them. Oscar walked the line, shook each hand, placed a key around each neck. When he reached Jalen, the boy was shaking. Not from cold, from everything. The months of work, the first carburetor he rebuilt alone, the first time anyone believed he could build something with his hands. Oscar placed the key around his neck. Jalen looked down, then up. His eyes filled. "Mr. Anderson, you earned it." Jalen broke. Oscar pulled him in, one hand on the back of the kid's head. The way you hold someone who needs to know they matter. Grant never attended a public event at the center. No photo ops, no branding. But once a month, an anonymous wire transfer. Consistent. Generous. Colton knew where it came from. Oscar probably did too. Neither said anything. Grant visited once, unannounced, side door. He stood in the back and watched a class. A 17-year-old girl named Brianna was rebuilding a carburetor at the end station. Alone. No help. Perfect. Grant leaned to Colton. "She's better than anyone on my racing team."
Colton grinned.
Ghost taught her. Grant nodded. For once, he didn't need to be the most important person in the room. A week later, Colton resigned from Blackwell Motors to work full-time at the center. Grant signed the letter without a word. No argument, no lecture about legacy. He signed it the way a man signs something when he finally understands that legacy isn't a name on a building. It's what your kid chooses when you're not watching. Late evening, November. The center closed, lights off, tools hanging in perfect order. Oscar walked through the empty shop floor, stopped at the far wall. 2 photographs. The first, Oscar, Terrence, and Darnell. Gratiot Avenue, 2008. 3 men, arms around each other, the Nova behind them. The second, taken 3 weeks ago. Same location, same pose. Oscar, Darnell, Jalen, Colton, and 20 students. Same car, different generation. Oscar placed one hand on each photo. Left on the past, right on the future. He walked outside, November cold, the kind that clears your head. The Nova sat in the lot, still rusty, still scarred, still beautiful. The original key in the glass case now, a replica in the ignition. He turned it. The V8 rumbled to life. Windows down, radio off. Just the engine and the road and Detroit moving past in streaks of light. 3 blocks from home, Nadine sat on her porch. Too cold for the porch, really, but she sat there anyway, the way she'd sat for 20 years, with coffee and a quilt and the patience of a woman who'd learned some things come back if you wait. She heard the engine before the headlights. That sound. The Nova rolled past, didn't stop, heading south toward Gratiot, toward the river, toward whatever comes after you've finished the race you were always meant to run. Nadine lifted her coffee cup. Go, Ghost. Man, I'm done telling this, and I still got chills. If this hit you, share it. Smash that subscribe. Hit the bell. Because somebody out there is getting overlooked just like Oscar was. And remember, don't measure a man by what he drives. measure him by what drives him.